You are surrounded by people who would pick up the phone. You know this. You have their numbers saved. You have had enough conversations with them to know they would not think it strange if you called. And yet, the phone sits there. The message window stays blank. The night stretches on. And you tell yourself the same thing you told yourself last time, that you will reach out when you have something worth saying, when things are better, when you are not such a mess, when you feel ready. You have been waiting to feel ready for a long time. Here's what nobody has told you directly, so I'm going to say it plainly. Your loneliness is not the result of being disconnected from people. It is the result of a very sophisticated internal architecture your brain built to protect you. And that architecture is now the wall between you and every person who could actually help. You did not choose to build it, but you have been maintaining it every single day. And the way it maintains itself is so quiet, so automatic, so woven into your sense of self that most people never see it for what it is. They just call it being independent. They call it not wanting to burden anyone. They call it being an introvert, being selective, having high standards for connection. Those are not descriptions. Those are the names your ego gave to its own defense system. There is a specific kind of pain that belongs almost exclusively to people like you. It is not the loud pain of rejection or abandonment. Those pains have names, have sympathy, have support groups. The pain you carry is quieter and stranger. It is the pain of being in a room full of people and performing connections so fluently that no one around you suspects a thing. Laughing at the right moments, asking the right questions, appearing warm, present, engaged, and then driving home alone and feeling like a ghost who has just spent 3 hours pretending to be alive. You are not faking the warmth. That is the part that is difficult to explain. You genuinely care about the people around you. You genuinely want to connect. But something happens at the threshold, the precise moment when the conversation could deepen, when you could say what is actually happening inside you, and you redirect. You deflect with humor. You ask about them instead. You say, "I'm fine," with such practiced ease that you almost believe it yourself. That threshold is where everything gets decided, and I want you to understand what is actually happening there at the neurological level, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Your brain learned early, very early, that emotional exposure was a high-risk transaction. At some point in your history, you revealed something real about yourself, and the response was wrong. Maybe it was dismissal. Maybe it was weaponization. Maybe the person you reached for was simply not equipped to hold what you handed them. The specific event does not matter as much as what your nervous system recorded. Reaching inward and handing that to someone equals danger. So your brain did what brains do. It built a protocol, a preemptive risk assessment that fires before your conscious mind even finishes forming the thought of reaching out. The protocol runs something like this. What if they're busy? What if I sound weak? What if this changes how they see me? What if I reach out and they respond perfectly and I still feel nothing? And then I have to confront the possibility that the problem is not the absence of connection, but something inside me that connection cannot fix. That last question is the one nobody says out loud, but it's the one driving the paralysis. There is a particular kind of loneliness that is not about missing people. It's about the terrifying suspicion that even if you let people in, the loneliness would still be there. And if that's true, then reaching out is not a solution. It's just an exposure of your worst fear. So the silence feels safer. Not comfortable, safe. Now here's where it gets structurally interesting, because this is not just a personal psychology problem. This is a conditioned response that the architecture of modern social life actively reinforces. Think about what social media has taught you about human connection. It has handed you a daily simulation of reaching out, posts, stories, reactions, replies that carry zero emotional risk. You can signal to 15 people that you're thinking of them without saying a single true thing about yourself. You can appear connected. You can feel the surface warmth of other people's responses without ever making yourself genuinely available to be known. And your nervous system accepts this as a substitute for the real thing, just enough relational stimulation to dull the hunger without ever feeding it. This is not an accident of technology. Platforms are engineered to be the perfect comfort food for exactly your psychology. Low risk, low depth, continuously available, instantly rewarding. And every hour you spend there is an hour your brain is learning that the approximation of connection is good enough, that you can manage the loneliness from a safe distance, that you don't actually need to cross the threshold. But you do, and some part of you knows it, which is probably why you're here. If you recognize yourself in what I'm describing, I want you to subscribe right now and leave a comment below. Tell me one specific moment, one situation where you felt the pull to reach out to someone and then stopped yourself. Describe what your mind told you in that exact moment. Those comments are not just therapeutic for the person writing them, they're a mirror for every person reading them who thought they were completely alone in this experience.
Now I want to give you something practical, not a platitude, a mechanism. The reason you do not reach out is not that you lack courage, it is that you have misunderstood the structure of emotional risk. You have been treating reaching out as a binary. Either you expose everything or you expose nothing. Either the conversation goes deep immediately or it was not worth having. Either the person fully receives you or the whole attempt was a failure. That binary is what makes the threshold feel so high that you never cross it. The actual architecture of human connection does not work in binaries. It works in micro-exposures, small, incremental revelations that build a relational container over time. The deepest connections most people have were not formed through one cathartic conversation. They were formed through dozens of small moments where one person chose to say something slightly more true than what was socially expected, and the other person met them there. You have been waiting for the conditions to be perfect before you allow yourself to be seen. You have been waiting for the right person, the right moment, the right emotional state. What you have actually been doing is engineering a situation so controlled that real vulnerability cannot enter it. Here is the intervention. It is small and it is uncomfortable, and it will feel insufficient the first time you do it. Stop waiting until you have something worth saying. Say something worth saying is not the standard. The standard is say something true. Text someone today, not because you have news, not because you have a question, not because there's a transactional reason to make contact. Text them because you thought of them, because something reminded you of who they are to you, because you wanted them to know they exist in your mind. That's it. That is the whole instruction. Not because it will fix the loneliness immediately. It will not. But because your nervous system needs to accumulate evidence that the threshold can be crossed without catastrophe. Every micro-exposure where nothing goes wrong is a deposit into a new neural account, one that is slowly building a different risk calculation, one that says reaching out does not always end in exposure. Sometimes it just ends in a conversation. Sometimes it just ends in someone glad you reached. The brain that learned connection was dangerous can unlearn it, but it will not unlearn it from the inside. It will only unlearn it through repeated behavioral evidence gathered on the outside. You have to move before you feel ready, because the feeling of readiness is the thing the old architecture produces to keep you in place. Now, I want to name the deeper layer, because the micro-exposure strategy will work on the surface behavior, but there's a belief underneath the behavior that also needs to be examined, because if you leave it untouched, it will rebuild the wall every time you take it down. The belief is this, that the version of you that needs something is a lesser version, that the you who is struggling, uncertain, lonely, or worn down is somehow not the real you, that the real you is the composed, capable, self-sufficient person you perform for everyone else, and that the moment you let someone see the struggling version, you will lose the status, the respect, or the identity that the composed version earned. This belief is the root architecture. Everything else, the not reaching out, the performing connection, the managing loneliness from a distance, is downstream from it. And here's the uncomfortable truth about that belief. The version of you that needs something is not a lesser version. It is a more honest version. Every person you respect has a private experience of needing, of struggling, of not knowing. They have simply been granted permission, either by their history or their environment, to let that exist without treating it as disqualifying. You have not granted yourself that permission. Not yet. The permission is not granted by a revelation. It is not granted by one good conversation or one moment of breakthrough. It is granted incrementally through the accumulation of experiences where you showed the true version and the world did not collapse, where what you thought was your most disqualifying truth turned out to be, to someone else, the most recognizable thing you had ever said. There is also something happening socially that you need to see clearly, because you are not navigating this in a vacuum. The social environments most of us grew up in were not designed to reward emotional honesty. They were designed to reward performance. Confidence performed, happiness performed, togetherness performed. The people who were celebrated were the ones who had the most convincing presentation of the version everyone agreed was acceptable, and the quiet, steady punishment for dropping the performance, even briefly, was a change in the room, a shift in how people looked at you, a subtle withdrawal of the social warmth you had grown dependent on. You learned to read that room early. You adjusted. You became fluent in the performance because the alternative, being seen and then being found insufficient, was something your young nervous system decided it could not afford. But you are not in that room anymore, not literally. You carry it with you, which is the problem. The social audit that ran in real time in your childhood environment now runs internally, constantly, even in rooms where no one is conducting it. You are auditing yourself on behalf of people who are not even present. You are preemptively managing the judgment of a crowd that exists only in your own threat assessment system. This is what self-imposed isolation actually is. It is not misanthropy. It is not arrogance. It is a very old protection program running on very outdated data.
The data is outdated because you are not the same person who first needed that protection. You have a greater capacity now to withstand discomfort, to weather imperfect responses, to survive the experience of being seen and not fully understood. The nervous system that built the wall was protecting a version of you that no longer needs that level of fortification. But the system does not update automatically. It updates through evidence. And the only way to generate that evidence is to take the action before the system gives you permission to take it. So here is where this leaves you. You are not broken. You are not uniquely defective in your capacity for connection. You are a person who developed a precise, intelligent, highly functional adaptation to an emotional environment that required it. That adaptation served you, and it has cost you in equal measure. The cost is not just the loneliness. The cost is the cognitive drain of maintaining the performance. The cost is the slow erosion of intimacy from every relationship that never gets to move past the surface because you will not let it. The cost is the particular exhaustion of being someone who gives a great deal to the people around them and privately receives almost nothing back. Not because those people are withholding, but because you have never made the space to receive. You do not need to dismantle everything at once. You do not need a breakthrough conversation or a sudden transformation into someone who shares freely and reaches out easily. That is not the goal, and it was never the goal. The goal is smaller and more durable. The goal is one honest moment today, one message that says something true, one threshold crossed, not because it felt safe, but because you chose to act as if the new belief were already real. That the version of you that needs something is not a lesser version, and that the people who matter can hold more of you than you have ever let them try. You have spent years becoming someone other people could rely on. It is time to find out what happens when you let someone try to do the same for you. Not someday, not when you feel ready. Today, one message, one true thing. That is how the wall comes down. Not in a moment, in the accumulation of all the moments you decided the risk was worth taking.